Here.
Councilmember Bertolino. Absent. Councilmember Bope. Absent. Councilmember Clark.
Here.
Councilmember Dodwell.
Here.
Councilmember Galani.
Here.
Councilmember McCune.
Here.
Councilmember Nyhan.
Jeremy.
I see you, so that's good. Okay, all accounted for.
Okay, great. Just in general for tonight, I know we've got a couple of members that have a double header tonight with folks, so I'd like to keep this to an hour and 10 at the most, so they can have a chance for a bathroom break, grab a cup of coffee, grab a snack. So we'll try to run a pretty quick trip tonight. We've also got Mrs. Willis here as well. So first, I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the minutes. Motion by Councilmember Dodwell, seconded by Councilmember Clark. Any corrections? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Okay, any opposed? Any abstain? And it looks like, I think Crystal's frozen. Okay, so without objection, I would like to move the second for action item up on the agenda. We have Emily here from the WBA, so out of her respect for her time, if there is no objection, let's go ahead and do so. Okay, seeing none, Julian, would you please introduce item number 2?
I shall. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I provided a report to everybody kind of outlining the background of where we are with this item. For those of you that have been around in the last year or so, last year we hosted the first ever Wildwood Winterfest and tree lighting. Working with the Wildwood Business Association, this was something that Chair Edens brought to us early last year in the spring of 2019 to consider doing last winter. And working with the WBA, we worked together to host the event last December, which, if you were there, had many different holiday festivities included, with a vendor fair with local businesses. It had visits with Santa Claus, carolers walking up and down the street. There was a food truck, a heated outdoor tent, and a number of other activities. There's obviously always room to improve, and we were looking forward to hosting our second Winterfest and tree lighting this year, not knowing that 2020 would bring what it did. But there's definitely still interest, at least locally, to do some type of activity. This was an event we hosted in partnership with the WBA. I know the WBA, led by Emily Willis, took most of the lead on hosting the event, with most of the regular events set up and logistic arrangements, but the city did help out as a partner, both on site but also financially. The city did contribute towards the cost of the carolers, the Santa Claus, and a number of other components of the event. So talking through this past year, there was always an interest to hold another event this year in 2020, but given the current state of business and the community with COVID, there's obviously certain challenges, both on restricting the number of people in intentional gatherings, capacity restrictions on businesses, requirements for social distancing, sanitizing, and so on. So it certainly creates some challenges on potentially hosting this event again. Because of all those factors, we all thought it would be beneficial between Chair Edens, the president of the WBA, Emily Willis, and myself to bring this back to the committee to discuss it and see if there's just initially interest to hold an event, but B, realistically, can we hold an event? And I know the WBA had planned to do an event today, actually. There was initially planned a Halloween event this evening that would be happening in the next 25 minutes that is not happening because of certain restrictions by St. Louis County. And I think Emily can shed a lot more light on that as well. But given that the event originated from this committee with input from committee members and working with the WBA, it made the most sense to bring this back to the committee to at least decide some kind of path forward, whether there is interest or opportunity to hold it this year, or if the best case scenario is just putting it off until next year. that's pretty much the background of it. I will defer to Chair Edens and Emily for any other information.
We'll go ahead and Emily share her thoughts on, but I will say the one thought I had is last year when we did the official tree lighting with the time, that was a significant gathering of folks that stayed or went just for that. So I think at the very least, we would not want to do a tree lighting with a specific time. It would either need to be done before or after so that we wouldn't get a congregation of people. But Emily, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me tonight. To talk a little bit about what Julian said, tonight was going to be our Halloween walk, and our biggest obstacle was crowd control. How do you prevent everyone coming at one time? So you can put the event over several hours and fingers crossed that people don't show up right at 6 o'clock or right at 7 o'clock or whatever it may be. But that was our biggest obstacle, is trying to figure out how to get people to come at a certain time without the massive crowds all at once. Last year at our Halloween walk, we had about 3,000 people show up all at one time, pretty much. So this year we had to cancel it just because we just have no way of controlling how many people actually show up at a certain given time. So that's probably my biggest concern with us holding a Winterfest. What I'd love to see, the square lit up again. Yeah, I think it'd be really pretty and fun. And I think our community is craving some sort of unity type event, but my biggest concern would be crowd control and financing of it. As many of you may know, we were hoping to be a huge part of the barbecue bash and get funds from beer sales to be able to afford a nice tree and be able to put on a really good Winterfest. But as COVID has done all 2020, it's kicked us kind of to the curb with the event. So as far as the WBA is concerned, if this is something that the committee wants to move forward with, we will do everything in our power to make sure it happens. But when it comes kind of financially to it and the crowd control, I mean, we would need obvious assistance with it. We did sell, I think it was 20 booths last year. So that would help the funds, but once again, we didn't have that big fundraiser to be able to afford it if it's something you guys want to move forward with.
Okay, I've got Katie and then Crystal.
Thanks, Emily, for coming tonight. You guys do such a great job. I was wondering, would it be possible for us to somehow, remember we did the letters for Santa, or we wanted to do the letters for Santa last year? Would it be possible for us to put something outside of City Hall that would allow people to write letters to Santa, and then perhaps some of the businesses could pick up said letters and send them back to the people with maybe a little bit of their advertising in it? Or I don't want to, I don't know, I don't want to ruin it for the kids, but maybe mom and dad open this envelope first. There's something for your child and it is on the envelope, and then they can hand them the envelope from Santa. And I'd be more than willing to write letters back to people and play Santa. I'm just trying to think something out of the box that wouldn't require a physical presence, but would still instill some enthusiasm for families to come to the businesses in Wildwood before the end of the fiscal year.
So my understanding was that between Joe and Julian, we were still looking for a mailbox to make sure that we actually got that this year and with the budget. So
Okay.
Joe, can you kind of tell us where we're at on that?
Kathy Arnett's been trying to find either a purchasable one that achieves the goals we want in terms of quality and appearance. Otherwise, I've been talking to Glenn Gailey, who is pretty good with wood and woodworking. And I think he could do a very nice one as well for a nominal cost, given it's for the holidays. So we have a couple of irons in the fire, and I'll probably have a little more information right after the end of this month.
Great. So maybe we can put that on the back burner. But for those of you that are new to the committee, there was a list of ideas from last year, and some of it we just ran out of time for, and some of it we ran out of money for. But reinstating the Letters to Santa program was one of them. But adding a physical mailbox so that City Hall could be an interesting and exciting drop-off location became the addition to that, and it's just something we just couldn't get done last year. So that's nice because that's about as socially distanced as you can get. So. Go ahead, Crystal.
So this came out of the question initially. So Joe, just real quick, did we, or permission with chair, did we ask the post office, could we borrow one since they removed a lot, or what happened to that option?
I did, and I can answer. I was told that after 9/11, they stopped giving out or making mailboxes purchasable that had been retired, and they are now destroyed and taken out of circulation.
Okay. Well, that blows that. I didn't see what that was. So first off, I want to say, Emily, thanks for joining us, and you guys do a great job. And I'm not the creative, I'm more of a list gatherer. So I really like to throw ideas out there and see if they grow or they don't, or what's possible. What I agree with the social distancing. I see the issues, but I also see that in St. Louis County, they've been very creative, and I would love to be the first city, if it's possible, with funding. An exception is maybe do a pre-registration for families to come see the tree light up. We regulate that by ticket or registration to limit the crowds. They do that in the drive-in movies or the concerts, and designate off spots. So their reservation is spot 1 on the grass that we could spray paint and get some volunteers to help us. So they have their square that they can stand in, and each family's, socially distanced. If that could be like a poll or something that we could do to get the kids outside. We're outside. Sporting events are back. My kids are going back to school full time inside buildings, I think. And then we could maybe hire a company. I know that we do that could do temperature screening when you come through the gate to show your ticket that you have a VIP reserved spot. I don't know how to launch that. It seems very simple from me speaking it. But I would love to see something like that shows that we're one of a kind. We're practicing social distancing, but we're also thinking outside the box. So I'd like to open that up on the floor for discussion to see if that's something that we can do. But sporting events and things are starting to happen outside. I don't see why we have to say no to this event.
I think that's some very valid points. It's absolutely something that we can do a version of, I believe, and anything that we can do to also make it safer for residents and also prevent any liability issues like temperature checking is a good idea. Just for information purposes, the carolers that we had last year, which they were great. They were, dressed in the Dickens era type, hoop skirts. They have already canceled because there's no way for them to be distanced and not project when they're singing. So I know that there's been some mention of just having carols kind of on blast on speaker for even extended periods of time wherever this would be held up. So, and I know that there were some folks on this committee that weren't able to attend last year, but one of the nice things was we had a strip, just like we would for the farmers market, of booths and tables on either side. So that would need to be, significantly spread out this year as well. So that, there was when Andy was still in business, she had a pretty significant hot chocolate line at the time. So it'll be hard to limit how folks congregate. I am signed up for which is a Wildwood Walk tomorrow. I know that there were pre-registration tickets, so I will be there to observe and see how distant it's actually achievable when pre-registration occurs. So I'm hoping I can get some ideas from that as well. But, Julian?
Yeah, and I'll add, we can, just Emily and I have experienced this in different events over the last few months, that we as a city can recommend to implement as many precautions as possible, and we have, but unfortunately we are completely at the mercy of St. Louis County. And I know that with the Halloween walk that was supposed to be today, the WBA was coming up with many different approaches on how to handle that crowd control, but ultimately St. Louis County just decided there wasn't a way to handle it. So I think, as Councilmember McCune said, we can come up with some new innovative ways to try and create certain pods that are distanced and allow people to be outside without interacting with each other and provide that to the county. But ultimately, the only way any event occurs is with the complete blessing of the St. Louis County Department of Public Health, which we can definitely hope to request and apply for, but still it does come down to them as the final decision maker.
And I would say too, that's a moving target because, you know, we can plan for something and we should still continue to plan, but we might hit November with the flu season combination and be back where we started. So I think having a backup plan, you know, at the very least, is if everything is canceled in person, which it could be, that we still have maybe a Santa time on Zoom with the story, you know, something as a backup plan. So that we're not total Scrooges, I think is is really the best we can do. I mean, the other thing too is a night winter market had been suggested to our farmers market manager, which could potentially have multiple dates. I mean, I guess the other thing we could do as well is if we would do a version of Winterfest that's more than, you know, one day, of course, that's more staff time and more resources. People have options and a longer time to come, and they may be even less motivated to congregate. So that's another thing we can think about is splitting it up.
There are tons, I'm going to jump in, tons of great ideas. And like Julian was speaking on, so in order to have an event, St. Louis County Health Department sends you a giant checklist of things that you have to answer. And the hardest part is, like I said, just how you're going to control them. So it could be with like pre-registrations and all that kind of stuff. All that's great, having it on multiple days. The WBA, I'm just going to speak for us, we just don't have the funds to help with, you know, hiring companies for temperature trucks. Right now, I'm not even sure how we'd get a tree. I can talk to Greg at Wildwood Tree Service again. He's one of my clients, to see if he can scrounge us up another Charlie Brown tree. But, you know, I mean, I'll obviously do everything that I physically can. And I know I've got a great leadership team behind me. It's just when it comes, we just didn't have that fundraiser. So all this sounds great, but it's all going to come down to being able to afford the staffing, the lights, you know, additional people to make sure that no one's congregating, temperature check companies. I mean, all this is going to add up really quickly. Mm-hmm. So as much as I would love to be like, yeah, let's move forward, we have to make sure that there's funds available for it. I'll sell as many booths as we can, but we have to spread them out now, maybe around the square or down the street further. And then that's going to have like power issues. I hate to be the one that's like just talking all the logistics, but it's a lot to think about.
There's a lot to think about. We've got Mr. Vunich and then Crystal again. And then Teresa.
Well, just as a reminder, I did go ahead and reserve Santa Claus for December 5th between 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. That was his available time for us.
Thanks, Joe.
Okay, and Crystal?
So I think with Emily adding to the logistics, I think that's important for us to understand. Can I just make, and I don't know if we need a motion necessarily at this, I just like to see an estimated cost. We've saved a lot of money in the city by not, I know that we're going to talk about budget, but I just like to see what we're talking about and see if it's even possible. Because I think during COVID, didn't the sponsorship do a drive-in movie on the side of the theater that was outside? So I think that was during COVID. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I know that they've had other drive-ins. And also, if you guys have been watching the news, the county council is getting ready to pull the power from Sam Page. So that might change the restrictions that we currently have as well, because I think they want more relaxed restrictions than more constringent ones. So that may change here shortly, but I do like your idea, Lauren, of having a backup plan and seeing where that looks as well. So if we could do something very simple, maybe not booths, and we fund just a tree lighting, you know, reserve, understand that we don't have any booths, but it's just to see a tree lighting. And I think that, and play music and have that opportunity, because I don't know what other cities are doing, but I'd like just to get somebody out and have some type of connection for the city of Wildwood, if possible. So I think that's kind of in a nutshell. I'd just like to see some numbers.
I think we have some of those. I know that we had the cost from Santa last year, what the warming tent was, and we had an estimated cost for lighting this year for the trees to make sure that the WBA doesn't have to do all of that since there are trees. You know, I'm just thinking out loud. This would have been the year that if the city had a light display in a park and we had tickets for drive-through, kind of like some of the other parks in the city, man, this would have been the year that it would have made money and have been the perfect thing. I don't know if there's any groups looking to that magically already have all of their light displays done that would suddenly want to put them in the park and let us charge a fee for it. But that would be, what a dream that would be if that's possible to get. But Teresa?
Yeah, I was thinking along the same lines as if we had a place that we could just stay in the car and be together, but everyone's be in their cars and drive up and watch the lights, or drive through around the square at a certain time and have a train of cars. But if we can't, and you know, it's possible we can't do it together, is a virtual program maybe something we can do, and we set up the tree and we light it and it's on Zoom or some kind of a media so that everyone can watch, and then they can also join in by adding little clips of lighting their own trees at home, and maybe even have a virtual Santa Claus for the children to talk to and we can watch, because that would be fun for some of us that don't have little kids anymore, and we could watch them talking with Santa.
We could have the Santa that we've already got on call.
And I know Councilmember Clark had requested that we get somebody that could help sign the children, and I think that's reasonable, and we need to look into that. And it would be nice if they were in some sort of costume with Santa, like a elf or a Mrs. Claus.
Right, and Lauren, the college, St. Louis Community College at Flow Valley, every year has a signing Santa. So we might even, you know, contact him as well as the one that's on call so that there's a signing Santa.
Mr. Vunish?
Well, Madam Chair and members of the committee, I believe at the last meeting, a charge was given to the Department of Planning and Parks to investigate lighting town center. And Gary Cruz and I have been working on that. We have 3 bids so far. Gary is meeting with the 4th bidder tomorrow to kind of finalize the process. We have bids that range from $15,000, which includes a no charge interior lighting of City Hall. We also have a bid for $83,000. $50,000 of that amount is for a 50-foot tree with a 3-foot star placed on it. And then in subsequent years, it would just be $15,000. So it's quite a range out there. But we've been focusing on Main Street, Taylor Road, Plaza Drive, Fountain Place, and then City Hall, both exterior and interior. We could possibly shift gears and do something in Community Park. Come in one way, Route 100 or Route 109, and go out the other, the opposite. It's an option that if you want to explore. I'm sure we could go back to the 3 companies that we've talked to already and see what they think.
It certainly wouldn't hurt if it didn't create too much issues with staff time. Just, you know, if there's anything that creative that we could do that gives people a route in their cars, if we have to have that as our main option, it would be nice to see. Councilmember Galani.
Oh, I got on mute here. I was thinking, instead of maybe because of the circumstances, instead of having a specific event like the tree lighting per se, where you're getting a large group to congregate in one specific area at a specific time, which obviously has a logistical issues with managing and that kind of thing, and a lot of costs involved. What if, to Joe's point, if we figure out a way to light up town center, maybe have the tree and everything, but just we go ahead and light it and it's already lit, and say, you know, it's being lit on this day, but not at a specific time. So starting on December 5th, it'll be lit, and we light up all of town center, and we create an event that lasts for the evening or whatever, where we incentivize the residents to basically, the whole area of town center becomes kind of like a Christmas wonderland type, you know, and we encourage everybody to go around to different businesses, and the different businesses have cookies or hot chocolate or carolers sprinkled around or whatever it is, which basically spreads people out across all of town center and forces them to mingle and interact with each different business that wants to participate, and almost like a progressive moving event that's all around. So you don't have any significant number of people congregating in one specific area, and all the restaurants and places in town center are already open. I mean, you go into Almagua on a Friday night, it's packed. It's, you know, with social distancing in place, but I think that would be a way to kind of facilitate folks visiting all the businesses and getting the businesses interacting and a part of the event. And then at the same time, it spreads everybody out. And since we're not hosting a specific city sponsored event within a certain area, we don't have to fence in or worry about applying for permits from the county or absorbing any costs associated with temperature checks and all that. It just becomes, you know, upon the businesses to manage the social distancing and all that kind of stuff, which they're doing anyway. And we're just encouraging people to visit all those places and participate in an event like that.
Okay, so I've got Councilmember McKeon and Mr. Cross, and I will say that's pretty similar to what's supposed to happen Thursday. So I'll be interested to see how it works out. I know there's some spreading out in parking lots, and then the other issue is we do have some great businesses that are on Old Manchester. So the way that they're handling this Thursday is a hayride back and forth. So I will be driving probably, because I don't know who's going to be in the hayride with me. So I would say that one thing that we would want to proactively think about is if we do that in town center, how do we make sure that the businesses like the Porch or Three French Hens feel included as well? So we've got to figure out some way to drive people back there. So Councilmember McKeon?
Great idea. I like that even better than mine. So thank you for that. Can you hear me okay? So since we're just going to make an announcement to light it, I don't know what Santa's function is going to be, but could we maybe record it and do it on YouTube and say that Santa's going to light the tree instead? And then we can promote our wonderful mailbox and say that he's looking for letters for people to drop off, and do it kind of like a virtual commercial, just to kind of add to the excitement of town center and the lighting and where the tree's going to be. It's just an added thing, but I won't take too much time. I can send an email, but I really like this, and I think we can pull resources to make that even better. So kudos to Councilmember Galani for coming up with the addition. I really like it. So.
Okay, and we have Mr. Cross.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. I was just going to mention, Mr. Vunich had mentioned some prices to light the town center and city hall and so forth. I was wondering, it made me think of what the city of St. Charles does down at Old St. Charles, and they line the sidewalks in front of the businesses with those votive or the candles and the bags and so forth, and it looks really, really pretty. And I wonder if that is something. It seems to me that it might be relatively inexpensive if we just lined all the streets that Mr. Vunich mentioned in our town center with those types of things. You know, if we weren't able to find the funding for, you know, all the lights and so forth, if that might be an alternative, because it sure looks pretty when you see it in subdivisions and other things like that.
I think that's a great idea. Councilmember Nyhan?
I think that luminaire idea is a great idea. I've done it before in subdivisions. It's labor intensive a little bit because you have to put sand in all the bags, and then if you use real candles, they have to be relit because they blow out really easily. But we could maybe use those little battery operated votives if they would give enough light. But I do think I love the idea of community park being lit, but I feel like that's pulling people away from town center. And like, I don't feel like that would be any kind of benefit to the businesses there, although it would be nice to drive through, stay in your car. But I guess my choice would be to do whatever we could do in the town center area to support the businesses.
Yeah, I think if we did it in community park, we would have to do it as a fundraiser with tickets and with the thought process that it would either help cover the costs or go back to another joint WBA event since they didn't have this. So sort of using it as the fundraiser that got canceled. But either way, there's some negatives and benefits. So I'm just looking at the time. So I think where the committee's at is that there's lots of good ideas and potential for maybe the department and Emily to kind of brainstorm, and we'll come back to the committee with some more figures and what this could look like fleshed out. Maybe a bare minimum. Let's assume that flu season and COVID got worse, everything in person's canceled, have that level, have multiple tiers of level of folks as well. So if that's okay with the committee, yeah, Councilmember McHugh.
Just my initial idea, I'd like to scrap it. So don't even waste resources. I like this card through dinner better. So please don't waste time on what I presented. I think that's much.
But I have to say, I do think that you brought up a movie idea and Cars again, and that would be nice. Of course, it's hard to plow a field if there's inclement weather, but if there's good weather, I think that's still a valid point. Did I see, Joe, did you have your hand up? Okay, Joe.
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. Is the Economic Development Committee meeting again before the end of November? Because if you're waiting till then, it'll be too late to make a decision if we're lighting the streets in town center or not. It appears from talking with Gary Cruz today, we'll have the final bid. So 4 bids tomorrow. And if it's okay with the committee, maybe it just goes directly to City Council at a work session.
I think that would be acceptable.
Yeah, our next meeting isn't until the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. So that's cutting it very close to the expected event time frame.
Well, and even if we move the meeting up, we still have to get on the schedule for those lighting companies. So they have to have a couple of weeks in advance. So I don't even see how moving the meeting up would give it the contractor enough time. So let's do that. Let's, without objection, we'll bring that to council. And anything else for Emily before she heads out? And I'll certainly be in touch with her as well. Okay, so thank you for your continued support. And Emily, I think we're good to go tonight. So thank you again to the committee for letting us move this up on the agenda. So now, is there anybody that would like to participate from the public for comments? Okay, it looks like we have no attendees that I can see.
Thanks, Emily.
Okay, so I think that means that there's nobody that would like to comment. So now let's go back to our regularly scheduled program, and let's go forward with the budget. So Julian and Mr. Cross and Ms. Kaiser, would you like to kick this off?
Sure, I will start and I'll kick it over to Steve and Dawn as needed. I appreciate it, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I provided an outline for the preliminary 2021 budget figures for the city's economic development program to everybody in the report. The economic development division is a component of the Department of Administration. The Administration and Public Works Committee met last night and approved the Department of Administration's budget, or at least approved a recommendation for the Department of Administration's budget for 2021, inclusive of these figures. But the Economic Development Committee is required to take a look at this budget and make recommendations regarding the figures contained within. I included 3 items within the report. An introductory memo outlining the history of our budget figures for this division over the last 4 years. There is a memo from Interim City Administrator Steve Cross that has been provided to each of our 3 standing committees regarding the recommendation for a balanced budget for 2021. And then there is the page from the preliminary 2021 budget showing those figures. So just as a little bit of a backstory to show the trends, from 2018 and 2019, the Economic Development Division of the Department of Administration had a operating budget of about $42,000. Last year for 2020, in order to make a balanced budget for 2020, those figures were reduced down to $28,000, or about 32% reduction. And then more recently for 2021, because of COVID, and again, making a balanced budget, those figures were reduced from 28,000 down to 18,000, or another 34% reduction. So just showing the trends of where the budget has come from in the last couple of years, from $42,000 in total for operating down to 18,000, including all payroll and all operating costs. The total proposed budget for 2021 is about 139,000, which represents just over 1% of the city's total operating budget. As I mentioned, there's been certain changes to each of the categories to reflect COVID and reductions to have a balanced budget. The figures are contained within the report, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And Steve and Don are both available as well.
Okay, so I would like to get a motion for approval on the floor before discussion. Is that made by Councilmember Dodwell? You're on mute.
I'll make it, but I do have a couple of follow-up questions.
Okay, is that a second by Councilmember McCune? Second? Okay, all right. Councilmember Dodwell,
Yeah.
back to you.
I just want to make sure, is this going to be enough funding to even do the job that you need to have completed? Although I do know you've got another job on your plate right now in the coming months as well. So how does the rest of city staff feel about not having much of a budget to work with?
I appreciate it, Councilmember Dodwell. The figures that were included for 2021 somewhat mirror those that we had anticipated for how 2020 would conclude, based off the modifications to certain programming, either cancellation of events or conversion to virtual. A lot of our anticipated costs for conferences, trade shows, conventions just did not occur this year. And I am pretty positive that most of those will not occur next year either. Or if they will, they'll be in a much more reduced format. So there are some certain fixed costs, whether it's printing or membership to certain databases, being involved with the local chamber and WBA events and the like. But there's definitely a significant reduction that reflects not being involved in proactive trade shows or conventions of sorts, not traveling to national conferences, not participating in local charity events of sorts. So there's definitely been a significant reduction, but those reflect, I believe, where we believe we would end 2020, and believing that there's not going to be much different activity in 2021. I think we'll be okay. I'm not going to lie, it's not going to be easy, but I think it'll be, we can definitely complete our goals with the budget that's been identified.
Do you feel like, and one more question, Chair, do you feel like you have mechanisms in place to be able to reach out to potential businesses and garner their interest in the city of Wildwood?
I do, but the reach will be much more local and statewide, not as much national, because we won't have that proactive involvement, maybe those national trade shows and conferences. So we can still do virtual outreach, whether it's by Zoom calls and emails and phone calls, but as far as in-person presence with some of those national companies, because we're not traveling to those national events, it just won't be as prominent. But we'll do a lot of local outreach with the resources we have available to us.
Thank you, Julian. I just wanted to make sure the entire team here knew some of those perspectives.
Councilmember McCune?
Okay, thank you. First, kudos to Steve Cross and Dawn Kaiser for putting the budget together, and Steve jumping right away. So for jumping in and getting this information for us. And I also appreciate that the summary of how much percent the overall city operating budget this does equate to, because when you look at figures, you wonder what percent that is. So I appreciate that information. I have one question. It's probably to Mr. Cross. if we do run short in this budget, let's say things pick up and we need more funding for this, how do we get funds added next year if we need to increase this budget? Where does it come from?
Thank you for the question, Councilmember McCune. There will be an opportunity at mid-year, as there is each and every year, to review the budget. So in this case, the 2021 budget. It would be nice if at that point in time the numbers are trending up, and it looks like perhaps revenues are coming in higher than maybe that we anticipated, because this is a conservative budget and it's based on what happened in 2020, and we're expecting much the same in 2021. But if things change for the better, and it looks like we might end in a surplus, then that will certainly be an opportunity then for each of the department heads to make some adjustments. We give them the opportunity to perhaps put some additional dollars in there or make some changes to reflect trends at that time. So there will be another opportunity mid-year, and then we'll make an end of the year final budget adjustment, but there will be an opportunity mid-year.
Okay. Yeah. Concern is like in business, when we start minimizing budgets and taking money from it, which we need to, I just want to make sure that when we do come on the upswing, that this is not kind of squeezed together to say, oh, we don't need those programs, because we've really gotten to a great place with this committee. So thank you for that information. And I think that if there's a possibility, if we need more funding, there is an option. So
I have
Yes.
to
I know for other questions.
I really, really appreciate your comments, Councilmember McCune. It's the same way with every public policy cut. For example, once you cut taxes, it's always harder to add them back, right? So I share some of the same concerns. We went from a pretty proactive committee, and now we're becoming sort of more of an informational download because our budget's been cut. So we may, come up with some great new ideas, but we're not going to have the funds to implement them. So one of the things I'd like to do is, whatever we come up with in the committee, maybe we can, start another version of a wish list for a 5-year plan or 2-year plan, so that when money becomes available, we have something on the table to say, yes, we need it, and here's what we'd like to spend it on. It's always easier to make a case when we can go back and say, here's the 3 programs we'd like to reinstate, here's the conventions we'd like to go to, and here's all the great new things we just decided to do as a committee. So. But yes, this is quite the hemorrhage from this budget. So, anybody else? Councilmember Clark?
Okay, so this is going to show how ignorant I am with all of this, but I do have a question. If this was chemistry, I could read it, but now it's just all these numbers. So I'm looking over this, and I thought I was going back through all these papers. I thought I read someplace where there was a cost of living increase for the salaries, but I don't see that on the budget. Isn't there, are the salaries increasing?
Councilmember Clark, it's in there. I sent out a updated table at the end of the day, probably about 4 o'clock this afternoon, that reflected the 1.3% increase. And I believe Dawn can shed better light on this than I can, but the original 2021 number for salaries was closer to 94,000. So the 1.3% increase is what took it to the current number.
Okay. Yeah, I thought I saw that somewhere. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember McCune?
Just one more follow-up. Oh, I'm sorry. One follow-up then. If we have the salary increase, I guess I'll defer to Mr. If we get the CARE Act funding, can that help implement all those salary increases? Does it hit the bottom or the overall budget? Can those be dispersed for salary increase?
Okay. Councilmember McCune, I think I got most of the gist of your question. You were kind of breaking up, so I think you were asking about the CARES money. We have in fact applied. The city has applied for our portion of that funding of that $2 trillion stimulus package. That then $1.9 billion of that went to the state of Missouri. $147 million of that then trickled down to the St. Louis County. And on a $69 per capita basis, $2.4 million would ultimately flow to the city, assuming that we were approved for those expenditures. I did fill out the paperwork and everything that was required to apply for that. Just last evening, I received notice from the St. Louis County that the funding statement was to be available today for the mayor to sign. I've not heard that he actually received that. So the process would be once he signs it and it goes back to the county, then they would release 1/2 of the amount that we applied for. And then the second half would be released upon me providing documentation to support our request for the maximum funding of $2.4 million. That money is for 2020, and it's built in currently in the amended 2020 budget, which you all have not seen formally yet. There was a first reading of it, but it's going to change significantly as part and parcel of this 2021 budget. But we don't want to provide it, and we don't want to count our chickens before they're hatched. So we should be presenting that hopefully not at this council meeting, but perhaps the one following. However, that has no impact, Council Member McCune, on the 2021 budget. The 1.3% cost of living adjustment that the mayor asked Dawn and I to build into the budget is being funded from, we just kind of sharpened our pencils a little bit about some revenue projections so that we were able to provide that cost of living adjustment and still have a balanced budget. And that is the budget that we have presented to you all now. So anyway, but the CARES funding is money going into 2020 and then just rolls into that fund balance if those funds. And those funds, as you also know, are specifically earmarked. They have to be for police or public safety expenditures. Those CARES funds cannot be used for salary increases or anything. They have to be specifically related to those two items, for police and for public safety.
Great. Thank you for the clarification. I just wanted to see if there was some offset and what the rules were. So thank you. And Madam Chair, I'm finished. Thank you for your time.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so unless there's some more comments, I think we're ready to vote on this. So, okay, seeing none. So all in favor of the motion on the floor, which is to approve as recommended by the department, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstain?
I'm going to abstain. I don't understand it all yet, so.
Okay. All right, well, we're doing really great on time. So let's move on to the next agenda item. We have got one for information, which is the Economic Development Manager's Report. So Julian, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In line with past months, I provided my monthly report to you all, summarizing the last month of activity as far as business expansions, business openings, ribbon cuttings, special events, and the like. I'm happy to go through any of the highlights or answer any questions the committee might have.
Bueller? Councilmember Nyhan?
I just had a question, Julian, on down under other updates. I mean, that looks great. Like you're being invited to join these other councils and whatnot. I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So the two that you're referencing on that last page of the report under other updates, number 2, my role with the International Council of Shopping Centers for the last 3, almost 4 years, I've served as the P3 retail chair for the public sector with that organization. As of last year, I was invited to step up from the public sector chair role into the state director to oversee all operations for Missouri and Kansas for ICSC. In that role as state director, that position has a standing seat on that St. Louis Regional Permitting Collaborative, which that body is tasked with trying to find a way to unify all the different municipality and county permitting regulations across St. Louis. It was largely founded by many of the development types and builder types of St. Louis to try and make the development process as streamlined between city boundaries as possible. This is trying to make the process easier without involving any of that, bad words better together approach that we heard a couple of years ago. I was invited to join that board, that team within the last couple of months, taking over from my predecessor, the past state chair of ICSC for the last 3 years. I was contacted by the person in charge of it. They were very interested to hear the public aspect to it. Every person in my role prior to me taking over that seat has been more of a private sector, whether it's a developer, an attorney, a broker of sorts, usually a little bit more benefiting from streamlined approaches than the public side. So they were very interested to hear how we would approach our interest in the role to navigate that challenge. I believe I have a conference call coming up with them in about 2 weeks, which will be my first involvement with that team, and I'd be happy to report back on it. The second one, which is number 3 on that same page, for the last 3 years, I've served as District 5 co-chair for the Missouri Economic Development Council. District 5 is the greater St. Louis region. It covers about 6 counties in the eastern half of the state. This past year, I was nominated to step into the public policy chair role for this organization. The public policy chair works hand in hand with our legislative consultant, Brian Grace of the Nexus Group, to advocate for all of our legislative priorities, identify what our priorities are for the organization, put together a public policy agenda for the coming year, and then help to advocate for those issues in Jeff City via our legislative consultant on behalf of that organization. So within the last, 2 months, I worked with my public policy team to draft the agenda that's included with the report, which is the very last page of that attachment, to summarize all of the different priorities that were communicated to us by our membership across the state of what this organization, MEDC, should focus on for 2021. Many of the priorities are consistent with past years, funding certain programs and certain departments at the state level that are important for our role and for our function. Because of 2020 and its impact on the state of Missouri and on economic development in general, we made sure to add 3 brand new key focuses within this agenda because of the impacts on COVID, both on the business community, but also on local government, and not exactly just local as far as cities, but counties and states as well. Those 3 main priorities that we made sure were included and were supported by the membership were broadband expansion, which has always been a key priority for us just in general, but because of the impacts of COVID forcing many of our state's workforce to work remotely from home, children participating in virtual classrooms, broadband has just become more important than ever as a primary utility for our state, and making sure that we as an organization support as much full funding for the Broadband Development Fund at the state level as possible. And then the other 2, obviously Wayfair online sales tax being a big component, COVID driving even more business to shop online, how that impacts the small business community and how that impacts sales tax revenue for cities, making sure that we as a state of Missouri get on the same page as the other 48 states that are already imposing and collecting an online sales tax. There's been some discussion at the state level about a corresponding tax cut to make sure that the collection of the Wayfair legislation is revenue neutral. We want to make sure that it warrants standalone consideration and is revenue positive. And then the last one was the existing incentive programs because of the impacts of House Bill 1854, which was adopted last May and ultimately vetoed by the governor in June, trying to challenge the authority of municipalities to create certain local incentive programs to facilitate economic development, making sure that we as a state help to protect those programs because of how important they are for local implementation. So it's kind of a summary of how public policy impacts our state and impacts the MEDC as an organization. At the conference I was at last week, the membership adopted and approved this agenda for this coming year. So that was a very key part of that approval, was being on that team to draft this agenda, putting it forward to the membership and having it approved. So between MEDC and the Permanent Collaborative, it definitely gets our name out there and active with people both regionally and statewide.
Right. That was a great explanation. Thank you. And congratulations.
Thank you.
I would like to just say too, before Katie, that this is not normal to have someone that's serving as a manager that is this involved on the state and regional and US wide level. I mean, this is very special. So I'm thrilled to get to work with Julian. So Councilmember Dodgeball.
I was just going to say the same thing, Lauren. We are very, very blessed to have such a proactive individual be in this role for us. These activities that he's doing outside of the city of Wildwood helps businesses and corporations that want to do business in new locations know more and more about the city of Wildwood when they see his name on this recommendation list that was just made. The whole state's looking at him, and businesses throughout the country are looking at what's going on in Wildwood now. So I just want to applaud Julian for having the willingness to serve, also the willingness to continue to find ways to let people know about our city too. So great job, Julian.
Thank you, Councilmember Dodgeball, and I saw Councilmember Clark's hand go up.
Yes, I have to echo what you said. I've been really pleased with Julian's work, and he has he's very organized. You're very organized, Julian. You've got it. You've been progressing very quickly, and you've got a lot of leadership skills in that. I have a question though. When I look at this report and hear it, I hear the things that we're doing, and things are good, and you're progressing and you're doing great. But how do I tell the people in Ward 1 how we've met our goals? How much have we met our goals? I think from what I've seen over the time, you've met and exceeded the goals that were probably set out at the beginning of the year. But with this report, I don't see how well we have been doing, because sometimes I hear things like, well, look at all of the businesses that are empty. Instead of looking at the glass half full, you're looking at the glass half empty. And going through the list of things and saying, well, look at all of these things that have happened in the last year, even with COVID, all of the things that have happened positively. If maybe you had a way, I don't know how, I'm sure you do better than me, but to put it on your report that shows we've completed so much of our goal and we've exceeded our goals, so we can show at a glance how well we're doing. Just a suggestion.
And we can definitely, and thank you for the suggestion, we can definitely update our report to include those kind of statistics, those metrics of sorts. COVID has definitely shifted our focus as a program to being heavy in recruitment, to being very, very heavy on retention. I think our approach for 2020 has just been to prevent the mass apocalypse and fallout of our small business community in the best way possible. I'd say prior to March 2020, we were setting records and doing really well as far as recruiting new business, filling available space, reducing our vacancy rates, increasing our filled square footage, and so on. Where if you had asked me 7 months ago, we had reduced our retail vacancy rate from 20% to 10%. We had reduced our office vacancy rate from 30% to 15%. We attracted over 30,000 square feet of new retail users into our existing spaces. We added net 15% new business to our business community. We were growing rapidly, and prior to March 2020, we still had a lot of businesses in the queue that were in the queue in March 2020 and in October 2020 are still in the same queue, because every bit of new business interest hit the pause button around March. And so we've been trying our hardest to make sure that our existing businesses are happy and healthy and if not growing, at least staying stable and healthy in some capacity to make sure that, they survive this the best way possible and are still here when it's over. Knowing that there are others that are still interested in coming in and making sure that we help them in any way possible.
Councilmember Clark.
Yeah, that's great. But if I had a graph on here that showed, here's how we are just holding even, but here's where we projected we would be, or here's where over the country people have, the cities have gotten to. We are holding our own, and maybe an explanation that you just gave. I think the residents would really appreciate that.
I think what Teresa's talking about would be an excellent addition to our final Wildwood newspaper that comes out, I think, in December, the end of December, or maybe the first part of January, somehow, so that we can explain how having an economic development manager here has helped retain the existing businesses, so that we share with the community the reason we put together the EDC, the reason we went out and hired Julian, was so that we could sustain ongoing business practices. And if we can show sustainability in that graph, everybody's graph went down this year, obviously, but if we can show the sustainability that's been held on, taking the words that are on this document in some way and converting it into retention numbers and things of that nature compared to other cities of our size or of our type, maybe across the US, I think that would be a great message to be able to send out when we send out our next Wildwood newspaper.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that we're looking for an easily shareable, easily understandable graphic that concisely shows a metric for success in the time of COVID that we can share. Okay, so that'll be a formal suggestion, and I don't think we need a motion for that. So do we have anything else? We're at 6:33. Okay, moving on. Julian, do we have anything for other business news and updates?
No, ma'am.
Okay, so please note the next time of the meeting will be back to our regularly scheduled time of 6 p.m. Thank you for adjusting your schedule so that we could have a double header with planning and parks tonight. And a special thanks to staff. And I have to say, you guys are you're a joy. I love this committee. That is it. So I would entertain a motion to close. Made by Councilmember McCune, seconded by Councilmember Dodwell. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Bye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? All right, well, that concludes the meeting. I thought for sure y'all would oppose and